welcome. This is Separated by Force, afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. My name is Sarah Tekath, and today we are recording in the studio of our cooperation partner, Broadcast Amsterdam. In the previous episodes, we have learned many things about the situation of afstandsmoeders and afstandskinderen in the 50s, 60s, 70s and early 80s. However, of course, this is already a long time ago. These days, societies have evolved, and we are already a lot further when it comes to discrimination of women, right? Today, I have Linde Bryk with me. Linde is the legal advisor at Bureau Clara Wichmann, and she's the director of the law clinics of the University Amsterdam. Today, she's going to talk with us about discrimination against women in the Netherlands that are still happening at current times. Welcome, Linde Bryk.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for hosting me.
You are a legal advisor at Bureau Clara Wichmann. For those who don't know it, could you please quickly explain what Bureau Clara Wichmann is and why it was set up?
Bureau Clara Wichmann was founded to improve the legal position of women in the Netherlands. It's already working for around 35 years, and it mostly focuses on the legal position of women, and it does that through different means. So, for example, one of the ways we work is that we support women financially in their legal struggles in cases of gender discrimination. We also provide legal advice and research in relation to certain new laws, for example, or questions about policy. And we try to inform the broader public about our cases because some of the cases we work on are landmark cases or are, in that sense, cases that show us the types of discrimination that are currently ongoing or have been ongoing in the past against women or against people.
Outside of the country, the Netherlands enjoy the reputation of being quite progressive when it comes to emancipation and women's rights. From your point of view, why is it still necessary to have an organization like Bureau Clara Wichmann?
In my opinion, the emancipation in the Netherlands is not yet completed. If you look at our website, for example, and you look at all the legal cases that we are supporting, the legal proceedings, that is already a sign that it's not completed yet. And that even though women in the Dutch constitution, for example, have equal rights to men, in practice we see that it's not always equal. And that women, and more in general, people are being discriminated against. And even though that might not be directly discrimination that you directly see, it can also be indirect. And so we see that there are many places where women are not equal to men, labor market, but also if we're looking at reproductive rights, women within their pregnancies and the rights that are not granted to them, for example, social security, sexual harassment of women in the workplace, but also women in the streets. So in that sense, I believe, yes, Bureau Clara Wichmann is very necessary.
You already mentioned a few parts. Could you specify a bit more what the fields are where women are still discriminated?
Yes, well, I think first of all, there's the direct discrimination that's directly in your face, right? And then there's this indirect discrimination. And here I believe Clara Wichmann is taking an intersectional feminist approach to these types of discrimination, what we see here. So I think it goes into income, it goes to race, so skin color, and of course gender discrimination. And a lot of those intersect, right? So we see that women from lower income groups, sometimes they would also be of a certain skin color, and so they get discriminated on both aspects and are wounded in a sense even harder than some of the other women. And so, yes, in the Netherlands we see, I believe, several areas where women's rights are not fully completed and not fully adhered to. One would be the labor market. For example, there's still a huge discrepancy between the wages of men and women. And then that follows through into who takes care of the children, who works part-time, who works full-time. And what we see, for example, often is that because there's such a huge discrepancy between men and women and their wages, in the end, once there are children within the family, women start working less because they earn less. And because they start working less, they will never be able again to start earning the same wage as men in the future once again they start working more hours, for example. So that's a sign. You do not want to know how many pregnant women do not get their contracts extended, for example, their labor contracts. And why do we not see that many cases maybe in relation to that topic? Well, once you're fully pregnant and all of a sudden your contract does not get extended, do you really have the energy to fight such a case, right? But this is happening at the moment, and it's a huge problem. Sexual harassment, but also reproductive rights. So yeah, there's a vast extent, I would say, of areas where it's still not fully emancipated.
In this podcast, we have learned from different sources that during the time of the afstandsmoeders, girls and women were mostly discriminated for their sexuality and specifically for the fact that they had intercourse before being married. Is there still discrimination of women in these areas today?
Well, I would, if you take it broader and looking at, for example, pregnancy and maternity leave, so you take it a bit broader, I would say yes. So, for example, not long ago, men in the Netherlands only had 2 days of paid leave when their wife gave birth, for example. Now it's extended up to 5 weeks, but it's still problematic because in those 5 weeks, for example, men only get paid 70% of their wages, which means that, again, this is a discrimination where we see an intersect because income, right? So low income classes, men would not be able to take on that paternity leave and would not be able to support their partner in that sense. At the same time, what I just mentioned, pregnancy discrimination, not extending labor contracts. But also, Clara Wichmann, for example, was involved in a court case where a few years ago, women who were freelancers were not entitled to paid maternity leave, right? And so a court case was needed in order to give women the right to paid maternity leave if you're a freelancer. And which is quite important because if we look more in general in the Netherlands, we see that for the past decades, the government has been pushing towards a more flexible labor market where all of a sudden everyone needs to freelance. So who's suffering from that? Women, disproportionately. Another part would be, for example, reproductive rights, right? So why do women need to pay for contraceptives, whereas men are also benefiting of it? So in that sense, I would say in a broader perspective, yes.
You just mentioned a case that Clara Wichmann took on about female freelancers. What are other cases Bureau Clara Wichmann is currently working on?
Well, for example, during COVID, and especially at the beginning of COVID, we fought a case in relation to access to the abortion pill, to abortion medication by mail, because what we saw was that at the moment, if you want to get access to abortion medication for the first trimester of your pregnancy, you would have to go to an abortion clinic. And during COVID, during the lockdown, for many women, it was impossible or very difficult to go to such a clinic. So following the example, for example, England and Ireland, we said, okay, you need to be able to get access to those abortion medications through mail. And we started summary proceedings to get a quick answer. But there, unfortunately, the court did not rule in our favor, which was highly problematic because we had women on the island. So if you're a 16-year-old girl and you want to terminate your pregnancy in the first trimester and you're living in one of the islands in the north, right? And you are forced to go to one of the abortion clinics on the mainland, you're away for, I don't know, 6-7 hours. How are you going to explain that to your parents? They might not even know. So I still believe that this topic, it's highly problematic, and it still remains that women cannot access abortion medication in an easy manner. Another case we're pursuing is the right to free contraceptives, right? We are saying there is, here we have a case of indirect discrimination because men are profiting from the fact that women use contraceptives, but why do women need to pay for them? Why is it only women that this burden comes to? And we've seen that in the past, Parliament has been pushing for motions in order to get contraceptives covered by the insurances, the healthcare insurances that people have. But even if they are being covered by healthcare insurances, we still see that women need to pay for them based on their own risk, that they still need to cover for their health insurances. So it's still not covered. And even though Parliament was pushing for that motion, it's still not put in place by the government. So we filed a case saying this is an unlawful situation and you need to start acting. And we asked the judge to proclaim that indeed this is an unlawful situation due to the indirect discrimination between men and women. And one of the final cases at the moment that we're also working on is a case which covers a large amount of women, and it sees to breast implants. It sees to breast implants called biocell implants, and they're made by a pharmaceutical company, Allergan. And there are about 60,000 women in the Netherlands that have these implants. And in 2018, the company decided to withdraw them from the market because they knew that they were not up to standard. They were leaking. And what you've seen is that there is a correlation between these breast implants and a specific type of cancer that that these women suffer from or can suffer from. And so now we've decided to start a mass claim proceeding against this big pharmaceutical company for those women in order to try to get their damages covered, because there are women that are already sick, but there are also women that are very fearful for their life and they still have the implants, but they would need to pay for the operation themselves. So that's another proceeding that we're just now starting, and we're still asking women to come forward, to contact us and to join us in this proceeding in order to get their damages covered.
When it comes to the investigation of the Dutch state of the afstandsmoeders and the afstandskinderen, it does not really seem like the authorities are facing their responsibilities. Do you feel they are doing so with all the fields that you've just spoken about?
No, I feel that it's not sufficient. That's also why I think these proceedings are still ongoing. I mean, if we even see that the Dutch parliament votes for a motion in order to get a change, and our current government is saying, yes, but we cannot take that on board. We cannot put that into law now because, for example, we are in a demissionary state, right? First of all, you can still decide in that sense as the government to still act. I mean, that's still possible within the law. So that already shows that there is an unwillingness on this part. And I think every time before we start a case, it's not like we do not send a letter in advance, for example, to the government, right? We ask them to take steps. And what we see often is that they don't. So then legal proceedings are needed. Yeah, and I think what you see on a larger scale, also, for example, with the toeslagenaffaire. So where people were getting benefits by the government if they have their children in childcare, and the government already at a very early stage started to see, in a way, citizens as fraudulent citizens. Whereas that was not the case, and people really suffered from this, went bankrupt, etc. I feel that this position by the government of sort of looking at their citizens as if they've already committed a crime, or that they're not worthy, sort of in that sense, of their rights, is very problematic. And I have the feeling you also see that with women, because in a way, if we look at the constitution, men and women are equal. If we look at the treaties that the Netherlands has signed, international treaties, they've signed the treaty, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, for example. So the legal framework is there, but acting on that legal framework is another step, right?
From your point of view, what needs to be done in order to get rid of discrimination against women in this country?
Yeah, that's not an easy question, and I don't have a full answer. Because I believe still a lot is needed. We're not there yet at all. I do believe that we have now a generation of young women in the Netherlands that are very active, that are standing up for their rights. And I really encourage them to keep doing so. And in that sense, I have a lot of faith that there will be change in that sense. We'll see some change in the next decades, but we also see that it takes decades in order for proper change. And I believe women already through the past century have been pushing it. And I hope that push continues. I do think that there's a huge responsibility for the Dutch government and policymakers and people within position of power to now start protecting women and granting the protection and that the legal framework grants. Because if we look at that legal framework that is in place, these types of discrimination shouldn't take place, right? And that's the same, I think, with the afstandsmoederzaak. There was already a framework in place. So if institutions would properly follow that framework, an unlawful situation might not be in place. But then apparently there's a difference between what's in the law and how it's being acted upon.
What can our listeners do when they come across a case of discrimination against women?
Well, I would say contact Bureau Clara Wichmann, for example, if you see that there is a systemic problem. But also, at the moment, free legal advice centers are being established in Amsterdam solely for women. So I would say if you yourself are suffering from discrimination, you could contact one of those free legal advice centers. For women in the Netherlands, and especially also in the Amsterdam region, who are, for example, undocumented, who do not have papers to stay in the Netherlands, who do not have for example, work permit or residence permit, but are facing discrimination or are facing other legal issues, I would say, please go to these free legal advice centers. And if they cannot help you, then they would know to whom to direct you to in order to access your rights. And this also goes for women, for example, single moms who are facing legal issues, women who are facing domestic violence. I know it takes a lot of courage, but please do contact those types of centers because they can try to help you out and put you in touch with the right people in order to alleviate your situation. It's the same goes for the juridisch loket. Yeah, and like I said, approach Bureau Clara Wichmann as well. I believe it's extremely difficult when you're in a situation where you're being discriminated to step up, stand up for your rights. It really takes courage, but there are people and organizations out there to assist you and to help you in your fight and in your struggle. So I would say, please have the courage then to stand up for your rights and to fight it together with some of the others.
Linde Bryk, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. This was Separated by Force, Afstandsmoeders in the Netherlands. If you like this podcast, please feel free to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast. If you want to support our cause, please share this podcast in your social media to reach the utmost attention for the injustice that has been done to Afstandsmoeders and their children in the Netherlands and all over the world. Thank you very much and have a great day.